The station called Haven hung in empty space between the borders of two warring empires. It was old, built centuries ago when the Xylos and Tyk were still friends. Now it was the only place they could meet without trying to kill each other. The negotiation room was large and circular. Light came from above, soft and white. On one side of the massive table sat the Xylos delegation, tall insect-like beings with hard exoskeletons and multiple eyes. On the other side sat the Tyk, feathered creatures with sharp beaks and quick movements. Between them, ancient mediators from neutral species moved back and forth, trying to find words that both sides could accept. They had been trying for 70 years. The war had started over a border dispute, a small system with no real value. Both sides claimed it. Both sides sent ships. Someone fired. Someone died. The fighting spread. Now 70 years later, no one remembered exactly how it began. They only knew it would not stop. Both sides were exhausted. Xylos' fleets were damaged, their ships held together by hope and spare parts. Tyk economies were broken, their people hungry, their children dying in battles no one understood. And still they fought. The current battle raged around a small, worthless planet called Dust. It had no resources, no strategic value, no importance to anyone. But the Xylos had a base there. The Tyk wanted it gone. For 3 months, ships had been dying in orbit, falling to the surface, burning up in the thin atmosphere. For 3 months, nothing changed. The mediators were desperate. They needed someone new, someone neutral, someone both sides might listen to. Someone suggested humans. The suggestion was met with confusion. Humans? The newcomers? The weak, harmless species that spent all their time trading and mining? What could they possibly offer? But no one had a better idea. So they sent the request. A week later, a single human ship arrived at Haven. It was small, unremarkable, covered in the scars of long travel, but otherwise ordinary. Exactly what the galaxy expected from humanity. It docked without fuss. A ramp extended. A woman walked out. Her name was Sarachin. She was medium height, with dark hair pulled back and calm eyes that missed nothing. She wore a simple uniform with no decorations. She looked like someone's aunt, come for a visit. She greeted the mediators politely. She greeted the Xylos politely. She greeted the Tyk politely. She asked questions. Lots of questions. She wanted to know about the war's beginning. She wanted to know about the major battles. She wanted to know about the leaders, the strategies, the goals. She listened carefully to every answer, writing notes on a small tablet. The Xylos and Tyk were confused. Why did she need to know all this? What difference did it make? Sarachin did not explain. She just kept asking. She read the history of the war. She studied the battle at Dust. She looked at maps and charts and casualty reports. She spent 3 days in her ship, going over everything. Then she requested another meeting with both delegations. They gathered in the same room. Xylos on one side, Tyk on the other, mediators in between. Sarachin stood at the head of the table, her tablet in her hands. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I have studied your war. I think I understand it now." The Xylos general leaned forward. His name was Kex, and he had been fighting this war for 40 years. "Good. Then you can tell the Tyk to surrender." The Tyk admiral, an old female named Chur, ruffled her feathers angrily. "We will never surrender. Tell them to leave our space." Sarachin waited for them to finish. Then she spoke. "I have one question first. Just one. Why haven't you won yet?" Silence. The Xylos and Tyk looked at each other. They did not understand the question. Kex spoke first. "Won? What do you mean won?" "I mean won," Sarachin said. "Victory. Defeating your enemy. Ending the war on your terms. Why haven't you done that?" Chur tilted her head, confused. "Wars are not won. Wars are fought. You fight until both sides are too tired to continue, and then you stop. That is how war works." Sarachin looked at them for a long moment. Her face showed nothing, but something shifted in her eyes. "I see," she said quietly. She wrote something on her tablet. Kex leaned forward again. What does that mean?" Sarachin looked up. "It means I understand now. Why this war has gone on for 70 years. Why you're still fighting over a worthless rock. Why nothing changes." She closed her tablet. "You don't know how to win. You never learned. You fight until you can't fight anymore, and then you stop and wait until you can fight again. That's not war. That's a ritual. A very expensive, very deadly ritual." The room was silent. Chur spoke softly. Then what is war, human? What does your species do? Saracen looked at her. Her eyes were old. Older than they should have been. We end it, she said. One way or another. We end it. She turned and walked out, leaving the aliens staring after her, confused and suddenly, inexplicably afraid. The private meeting room on Haven was smaller than the main negotiation hall. It was meant for quiet discussions, away from the tension of the larger talks. Now it held the lead mediators from a dozen neutral species, all staring at the human woman who sat calmly at the center of the table. They were frustrated. They had brought humans in to help end a 70-year war. Instead, this human just kept asking strange questions that no one could answer. An elderly TYKRN mediator named Elder Trell spoke first. His feathers were gray with age, and his voice carried the weight of decades spent trying to keep peace. Ambassador Chun, he said carefully, you asked the delegations why they had not won. They did not understand the question. To be honest, neither do I. What do you mean? Why haven't you won? Winning is not the point of war. Saracen looked at him with calm interest. Then what is the point? Trell spread his hands. Honor. Pride. The chance to prove your strength. You fight until both sides have shown their worth, and then you stop. That is how war has always been. Another mediator, a Xylos named Vex, nodded. The fighting shows who is stronger. When that is clear, the weaker side yields. The stronger side shows mercy. Everyone goes home with their honor intact. Saracen listened carefully. She did not laugh. She did not argue. She just nodded slowly. Honor, she said. Yes. We have that too. In our history, many wars were fought that way. Two armies meet on a field. They fight until one retreats. The winner claims victory. The loser lives to fight another day. The mediators nodded. Finally, the human understood. But, Saracen continued, we also have something else. She pulled out her data tablet and placed it on the table. The screen glowed to life, showing images the mediators had never seen. We have a history of wars, she said. Thousands of years of them. Longer than any of your species have been in space. We have studied war the way other species study science. We have learned what works and what doesn't. She scrolled through images. Ancient paintings of battles. Black and white photographs of soldiers in trenches. Color images of cities burning. Videos of ships exploding in orbit. We learned that fighting with honor works fine, she said, if both sides agree on what honor means. If both sides follow the same rules. If both sides believe that mercy is a virtue and surrender is an option. She paused. But what happens when one side doesn't care about honor? What happens when one side just wants to win? When they don't care about rules? When they don't accept surrender? The room was quiet. Then, Saracen said, you need to understand something else. You need to understand total war. She began to explain. She talked about strategy. Not just moving ships and firing weapons. About targeting the things that make war possible. Factories that build weapons. Farms that grow food. Fuel depots that power ships. Communication networks that coordinate attacks. She talked about psychology. About breaking the enemy's will to fight. About making them understand, deep in their bones, that continuing is worse than stopping. About targeting not just soldiers, but the things soldiers care about. Their homes. Their families. Their hope for the future. She talked about history. About wars that lasted generations. About cities destroyed, populations displaced, entire cultures erased. About the things humans had done to each other when honor meant nothing and survival meant everything. The mediators listened in growing horror. Elder Trell's feathers were fully ruffled, his face pale. Vex the Xylos had pressed himself back in his chair, his multiple eyes wide. Other mediators whispered to each other in distress. Finally, a young Borati mediator named Moss spoke up. His voice was barely a whisper. What you're describing, these are atrocities. These are the things we have laws against. These are the things that make us monsters. Saracen shook her head slowly. I am describing war, she said. The real kind. The kind you have been fighting for 70 years without realizing it. You just don't have the words for what you're doing to each other. She gestured toward the main negotiation hall. Look at your war. You have been starving each other's populations without meaning to. You have been destroying each other's economies without planning to. You have been killing each other's children without even knowing why. She stood up. You call it honor. You call it pride. You call it proving your strength. But it is still war. It is still death. It is still suffering. You just don't have the words to see it clearly. She looked at them, one by one. Let me help you, she said. Let me show you what your war really looks like. Through human eyes. We have words for everything you're doing. We have names for every kind of suffering. We have seen it all before. She picked up her tablet. And we have learned the hard way that the only way to end war is to understand it. Really understand it. Not the honor. Not the pride. The truth. She walked toward the door. At the threshold, she paused and looked back. Are you ready to see? She asked. Are you ready to know what you've really been doing for 70 years? The mediators sat in silence. They did not know how to answer. They were not sure they wanted to know. The human ship moved slowly toward the battle at dusk. It was small, unarmed, clearly marked as a diplomatic vessel. Neither side fired on it. Neither side even seemed to notice. Inside, Sarah Chun and her team worked quietly. Screens covered every wall, showing data from 100 different sensors. But these were not the sensors the galaxy expected. Human sensors were different. They did not just measure ships and weapons. They measured patterns. The flow of supplies from Xylo's space to the front lines. The communication networks connecting TYKRN commanders. The morale indicators buried in battle reports. The economic strain showing in both empires. They built a complete picture. Not of the battle. Of the war. Sarah Chin watched the data flow across her screens. The more she saw, the quieter she became. The Xylos and TYKRN had been fighting over dust for 3 months. 3 months of ships dying, crews burning, families losing children. And for what? Neither side understood logistics. The Xylos sent ships from their homeworld, a journey of weeks, only to have them destroyed in the first engagement. Then they sent more. Then more. They never adjusted. They never learned. The TYKRN did the same. They poured resources into a battle they could not win, would not win, never even tried to win. They just kept fighting. There was no strategy, no goals, no concept of victory, just an endless cycle of ships arriving, ships fighting, ships dying. Sarah Chin leaned back in her chair. They're not fighting a war, she murmured. They're participating in a ritual, an endless, pointless ritual of death. Her tactical officer, a young man named James Cole, looked up from his station. He was barely 30, but his eyes held the weight of someone who had studied human history, who knew what humans were capable of. Ma'am, he said, I've been analyzing the same data. They're going to keep doing this forever, until one side runs out of people, and then the other side will be too weak to do anything with their victory. Sarah Chin nodded slowly. I know. James hesitated. Then he spoke. Ma'am, we could end this in a week. She looked at him. He met her gaze steadily. 1 week, he continued. We know their supply lines. We know their communication networks. We know their weak points. We could disrupt everything. Force them to stop. Make them see. Sarah Chin was quiet for a long moment. I know, she said finally. But they didn't ask us to fight. They asked us to help. James frowned. Same thing. Sarah Chin almost smiled. It was a sad smile, tired old. No, she said. No, it's not the same thing. Fighting is easy. Helping is hard. They don't know that yet. But they will. She stood and walked to the viewport. Outside, far in the distance, tiny lights flickered as ships died. We could end this in a week, she said quietly. We could show them what war really means. But they wouldn't understand. They would just be afraid. And fear doesn't create peace. It creates more war. She turned back to James. We're going to do this differently. We're going to show them. Not by fighting. By explaining. By giving them the words they don't have. James nodded slowly. And if they don't listen? Sarah Chen's eyes hardened. Just slightly. Just enough. Then we'll have to make a different choice. But not yet. First, we try. She walked to her console and began typing. Request a meeting, she said. With both sides. Not the diplomats. The generals. The ones actually fighting. The ones who watch their people die every day. James raised an eyebrow. You think they'll agree? Sarah Chin smiled again. This time it was different. This time it had edges. Yes, she said. They're curious. What can one human possibly tell them about war? The request went out. An hour later, the answers came back. Both sides agreed. Sarah Chin looked at the responses. Then she looked out at the distant battle, at the lights flickering and dying in the darkness. Prepare a shuttle, she said. I'm going to talk to some soldiers. James stood. Alone, ma'am? Yes. Alone. They need to see that I'm not afraid. That I'm not a threat. That I'm just someone trying to help. She paused at the door. And James? If I'm not back in 24 hours, you'll know what to do. James nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I will. Saracen walked out. Behind her, the data continued to flow. The patterns continued to form. The truth of the war continued to reveal itself. And somewhere in the darkness, two species kept killing each other, unaware that everything was about to change. The observation post was a small structure built into the surface of an asteroid. It had thick walls and small windows that looked out at the battle beyond. Through those windows, ships could be seen exploding in silent flashes of light, their crews dying in the cold darkness. Inside, the room was crowded. Xylo's generals stood on one side, their hard exoskeletons gleaming in the dim light. TYKRN admirals stood on the other, their feathers ruffled with tension. Between them, a single human woman. Saracen looked at the commanders of both fleets. These were the beings who had been sending their people to die for 70 years. They looked tired, old, broken. She began to speak. You have been fighting for 70 years, she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried through the small room. Do you know how many humans have lived and died in that time? Generations. We have born children, raised families, built cities, told stories. While you have been doing this. She gestured toward the window. Outside, another ship exploded. You call this war. We have a different word for it. We call it stagnation. You are not trying to win. You are trying not to lose. That is not war. That is waiting to die. A Xylo's general stepped forward. His name was Kex, and his face showed anger. And you humans know better? He demanded. You, who have been in space for only 2 centuries. You, who came late to the stars. You dare to lecture us about war? Saracen nodded calmly. Yes, because we have been fighting for thousands of years. On our own world. With each other. Before we ever left our planet, we had already tried every kind of war there is. She stepped closer to him. We fought with sticks and stones. We fought with swords and shields. We fought with guns and bombs. We fought with ships and planes. We fought with weapons that poisoned the ground for generations. We fought until our cities were ash and our people were scattered. She looked around the room. And we learned something. We learned that if you want to win, you don't fight the enemy's army. You fight their ability to make war. You take away their factories, their fuel, their food. You take away their hope of winning. You make the cost of continuing higher than the cost of stopping. The general stared at her. The words hung in the air like smoke. A TYKRN admiral, an old female named Chur, spoke softly. That's what you've been doing to each other for 70 years, Saracen finished. You just didn't realize it. You thought you were fighting with honor. You thought you were proving your strength. But honor doesn't exist in war. Only survival. She pulled out her tablet and projected data onto the wall. Look, she said. This is your war. Really look. The data showed things the generals had never seen. Supply lines stretching thin and breaking. Economies shrinking year by year. Population starving because food ships were being used for war. Children dying of diseases that could have been cured if the money had gone to hospitals instead of weapons. This is what your war really is, Saracen said. Not battles. Not honor. Just slow, mutual destruction. You have been killing yourselves without knowing it. Every ship you lose is a ship that could have carried food. Every soldier who dies is a parent who will never come home. Every day you fight is a day you could have spent building something instead of destroying it. The room was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Then a young Xylos officer stepped forward. He was barely more than a child by his species standards, his exoskeleton still bright, his eyes still full of questions. Ambassador Chin, he said. His voice was barely a whisper. If you know all this, if you humans understand war so well, why haven't you conquered us? You have the knowledge. You have the understanding. Why haven't you taken everything? Saracen looked at him. Her eyes were sad. Old. Tired. Because we also learned something else, she said. We learned that winning is not the same as being right. We learned that the only war worth fighting is the one you cannot avoid. And we learned that peace, real peace, is harder than any battle. She turned toward the door. I came here to help you see your war for what it is. Not to fight it for you. Not to end it for you. Just to show you the truth. She paused at the door and looked back. Now you have to decide what to do about it. You can keep killing each other. You can keep pretending this is honor. Or you can choose something different. She walked out. Behind her, the generals stood in silence, staring at the data on the wall, at the truth they had never seen, at the war they had been fighting without understanding. Outside, the battle continued. Ships exploded. People died. But inside the observation post, something had changed. They were finally seeing clearly. The negotiation room on Haven looked the same as it always had. The same circular table. The same soft lighting. The same neutral walls. But everything else was different. The Xylos and TYKRN commanders sat across from each other. No diplomats filled the spaces between them. No mediators whispered suggestions. Just soldiers, generals, admirals, the ones who had been sending their people to die for 70 years. Between them, at the head of the table, sat one human. Sarachin. She had said everything she needed to say. Now she waited. The silence stretched. No one seemed to know how to begin. Finally, a Xylos general stood. His name was Kex, and he was old. His exoskeleton was covered in scars from 100 battles. His movements were slow, tired. "I have lost 3 children to this war," he said. His voice was rough, barely controlled. "My oldest son died at Dust. My daughter died at the same battle, 3 months later. I did not know until now that their deaths meant nothing." He sat down heavily. Across the table, a TYKRN admiral rose. Her name was Chur, and her feathers were gray with age. She had been fighting this war longer than anyone. "My people have a word for what we have been doing," she said. "It translates roughly as necessary sacrifice. We use it when we lose ships, lose soldiers, lose children. We tell ourselves it means something." She paused, her voice catching. "I do not think it means what we thought it meant." She looked across the table at Kex. He looked back. For the first time in 70 years, they saw each other not as enemies, but as fellow sufferers. 2 old soldiers who had lost everything to a war neither of them understood. Kex spoke again. "What do we do now?" All eyes turned to Sarachin. She sat quietly for a moment. Then she spoke. "You stop." Kex frowned. "Just stop? After 70 years? After everything we have lost?" Sarachin nodded slowly. "Yes. You stop. Not because you're tired. You've been tired for decades. Not because you've lost too much. You've lost too much every year." She leaned forward. "You stop because you understand now. You see the cost. Really see it. Not just the ships and the soldiers. The children who will never be born. The cities that will never be built. The stories that will never be told." She looked at both of them. "You stop because you choose something different. Because you finally have a choice. Before, you didn't know there was another way. Now you do." The room was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence. Not empty. Full. Full of possibility. It did not end overnight. Peace never does. The fighting continued for weeks while messages traveled between fleets. Ships had to be recalled. Soldiers had to be told to stop shooting. Generations of hatred could not disappear in a day. But it ended. Months later, the Xylos and TYKRN signed a treaty. Not a surrender. Not a victory for one side. A real peace. With terms both could accept. With plans for rebuilding. With hope for the future. Human advisors stayed. They taught what they knew about ending wars, not just fighting them. They showed the galaxy that there were other ways to solve problems. Other ways to be strong. Sarachin stood on the observation deck of her ship, watching through the viewport as dust grew smaller behind them. The planet was worthless. Nothing there. No resources. No strategic value. No reason for anyone to care. But it would be remembered. James Cole, her tactical officer, stood beside her. He was young, but his eyes held the weight of everything they had witnessed. "Ma'am," he said, "they keep asking. The Xylos, the TYKRN, the other species. They want to know why we helped them, why we didn't just let them destroy each other." Sarachin was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "Because that's what we used to do," she said. "Let others destroy themselves while we watched. We told ourselves it wasn't our problem. We told ourselves they deserved it. We told ourselves lots of things." She looked at the stars. "But we learned. The hard way. We learned that watching is the same as participating. If you have the power to stop something, and you don't, you're just as guilty as the ones doing it." James nodded slowly. "So we helped them see the truth. We showed them what war really means," Sarachin said. "Now they have to learn what peace really means. That's the hard part." James looked at her. "Think they can do it?" Sarachin almost smiled. It was a tired smile, but real. "I don't know," she said. "But I think they'll try. And trying is all any of us can do." The ship moved on, carrying them away from Dust, away from Haven, away from the war that had finally ended. Behind them, 2 species began the long, hard work of learning to live together, of rebuilding what they had destroyed. of telling their children a different story about the enemy. Humanity watched from a distance, not as conquerors, not as saviors, just as examples, proof that another way was possible, and hoped, because hope was the only thing that had ever worked.